Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. Hey everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful holiday season, getting to a well-deserved rest, spending some quality time with family, all that good stuff. Today I'm really excited to bring you an interview I had with Richard Grove from Tragedy and Hope. Richard, he's a podcaster. He's got the great Peace Revolution podcast. He's an author. He's a filmmaker. His work is primarily around education, not so much the education that you get in public school or in the institutions of higher education, but specifically what you're not getting in those places, right? So that's where his focus really comes in: how to educate yourself, how to think critically, and how to create freedom for your life. So today we're going to talk a lot about creating freedom, personal freedom, putting a space between stimulus and response so that you can choose how you want to respond and better your life, meet the goals that you have for yourself. So that topic is very in line with the spirit of Choice Conversation. So it was really great to finally get together with Rich. We've been friends for a while now and have talked on and off and just finally got around to actually doing a podcast together. So it's exciting to get to work with Rich. He's a real nice guy and just a really talented content creator. His work is special. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend you check it out. Before we get to the interview, I did want to take 1 minute to say thank you to my supporters at Patreon. For those of you who are not aware, the best way to support the show is to go to patreon.com/choiceconversations and sign up. I just this week released a new episode of Choice Conversations, a bonus episode that's available only to Patreon subscribers. So this was with Nathan Frazier. It was another one in the series on starting an online business. And this one specifically got into the area of growing an email list. So email list is a really important tool for anyone that's wanting to have an online business. And Nathan just gives some incredibly valuable advice in there about the importance of an email list, some tactics for growing it, tactics for using Facebook ads and things of that nature. So go over to patreon.com/choiceconversations, sign up and check out that episode among the rest of the bonus content that I have there. That's, I've gotten some really great feedback from my supporters over there on the content I'm releasing. So check it out. I think you'll like it. One thing I did want to say before we get into the interview is that originally the discussion that I was going to have with Rich was going to be about productivity. I know he's a big proponent of getting things done and had interviewed David Allen, many years back, and he was one of the people that introduced me to getting things done. So I owe him a debt of gratitude for introducing me to that, because getting things done has been so valuable to me. And then just recently, a couple of weeks back, I had my interview with David Allen. So things have come full circle now with me interviewing Rich, and I was going to talk with him about his productivity systems, what tweaks that he's made. I could get into the tweaks I've made to getting things done and the tools we have for productivity. And we didn't really end up getting into that. I just let the conversation flow naturally, and there was a few tangents that we went down. But overall, I think the quality of the discussion was really good. Like I said, it really kind of focused in on critical thinking and bringing personal freedom to your life by creating that space between stimulus and response. And that space gives you choice. All right, let's get to the interview. All right, Rich, welcome to the show.
Chris, thanks for the invite. Sorry that it took so long to kind of get our schedules aligned. You took the entire month of November off. Is that what I remember from the email thread?
I did, yeah. I went out to San Diego and visited with a couple people you probably know, Wes Bertrand, Kevin Koskela. So that's from the Complete Liberty podcast, and also from Kevin is from Freedom Loving, his Freedom Loving podcast. So it was awesome getting to hang out with those guys and do some hiking, and I had some family out there as well. So it was a really good time.
Yeah, that's a good way to spend November. I think the rest of us spent it in like media Hades with all this fake news and everything going on. And it's like, from my background, having made a movie on the psychology of control, I became fascinated with all the psychological warfare operations going on and people like trying to muddy the water and use all these different divide and conquer techniques. And I'm like, just trying to sit back and take it all in, because I don't take sides in the whole election anyway. So it's that aspect was interesting to me to see like the people's visceral, emotional, irrational reactions to all this sort of stuff. And I just try to every now and then poke a little fun at it to help people keep it real.
Right.
But that's great that you got to go out and see Wes and Kevin, got to do some hiking, see your family. These are all healthy things, and that helps to keep you grounded, I'm sure. And I'm sure when you interviewed Dave and Alan earlier this month, you were refreshed. You were, feet on the ground. You're ready to implement some of his great production strategies, time management strategies, just tips for living life with a higher quality, because I think that's what all his work brings to everybody. And I've got it up in a tab for me to listen to as soon as I get some time later this week. I'm excited to listen to it.
Cool. Yeah. No, that was really fun getting to talk to him. And it's been his system is so great, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more here in our talk today as we focus in on productivity. But before we do that, I did want to take just a quick minute and have you just to tell my listeners about yourself, who you are, how you got to this place, and so on.
Well, that could be a whole show in and of itself, but to keep it short, I went to public school. I went to a state university in Pennsylvania that some people have heard of. It has a big football team, but I don't like to advertise it because I don't feel that I got any sort of quality education from that institution. But I did get a large bill. Right. I did get indentured from that process. I did have the luck of starting my own business franchise during college, so I learned how to run a business. I then changed my degree to business management because I felt it was more applicable to the real world. And learning how to run my own business gave me some unique sales skills. And if you ever took the time to stop and look around, you'll see that there's not a university in the country or pretty much the world that has any sort of sales degree. And yet every company depends on sales for their products and services. So you stop and ask the questions like, why don't they want you to know about that stuff? And I think it's because there's some really interesting interpersonal skill sets that you are forced to learn through that. For me, I went into sales after college, and that just means helping other people meet their needs. Now, unfortunately, a lot of other people take the shortcut to thinking, and they think it's something where they can take advantage of people and all these sorts of things. But you find out that in the long run, that's very antithetical to having a career in sales, because taking advantage of people or abusing their trust is no way to build relationships, and relationships are really the only way to have a long-term career in any type of sales. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have a long-term career in sales because I got in with some large corporate software companies that were providing enterprise software to Wall Street banks and insurance companies and defense contractors. And I soon found out that it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I had become a whistleblower. I went and represented myself in court. I then went to the mainstream media and said, hey, look, there's all these interesting crimes and there's stuff going on you guys should report on. And they said, that's not our job to report that stuff to people. Our job's really to serve the corporations. I'm paraphrasing what I learned over several years in that process. So that led me to sort of take a step back, find out and start to learn the things that I wasn't taught in school that were very applicable to the real world. And as a result, I wanted to share the things that I was learning with an audience. So I started podcasting in 2006. I continue doing that to this day. And along the way, I have added webmastering and filmmaking to my skills.
Nice. Yeah, that's quite an array of experiences you've had there. And sales is something I've really just started to get into in this last year as I'm looking to have my own financial freedom, looking into starting some of my own businesses and, to be able to quit my day job sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, sales is just so important. And it's interesting how it's got this reputation where, it's like a dirty thing, right?
It's like a used car salesman. That's what people think of. Like, oh, you're going to sell me a false bill of goods. I'm going to buy it and walk away and be sorry for it. And that's totally not what it's supposed to be about. Unfortunately, we have a lot of lazy people in our culture, and that has become the stereotype for it. And yet, every company that's successful out there that's offering a product or services has to engage in sales. So I really think one of the opportunities is how to teach people how to meet other people's needs in the way of sales that does not abuse their trust, that does create long-lasting relationships. And there's an opportunity right there just from the noticing the problem. We can say, hey, what will be an interesting solution? And you can make a business around that. I could introduce you to some of the people that I've encountered that do it on a up and up, type of, straightforward, never take advantage of anyone type of motive. But that's not very popular out there at all, and it's not easy to find for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, you're trying to build trust, and then you've got somebody that you can sell to over and over and over again. If you're constantly providing them with value, with things that they like, they're going to be repeat customers, and that's so much easier to sell to somebody that you built that relationship, that knows that, hey, everything this guy sold me in the past has been exactly what he said it was. It's all been really high quality and all added value to my life. So I'm willing to trust him again on this one when he's saying this is going to be important to me. That's so much easier than just like, okay, you sell somebody something that totally was false advertising. It's not a good product, and you've lost them as a customer forever. And you're constantly having to try to find new customers, constantly trying to find new people to dupe. Right. I mean, first of all, that's like really sleazy and,
sounds like a lot more work too.
Right. Yeah. But it's a ton more work. Right. Yeah. I mean, and not only is it like the ethical thing, and you might have a little trouble like sleeping at night with your heavy conscience, but yeah, I mean, that's a lot more work as well. You're right. And it's interesting when you look at the ads that are out there right now, a lot of them, like on TV, to me, it's like, what the hell is this ad even about? A lot of them, you can't even tell what the product is that they're selling. And I'm not sure how it came to be like this, but I'm like, maybe it's like you said, like they're just not even teaching sales in the correct way anymore. And you just watch these commercials and you're like, okay, what exactly was it you were wanting me to do now? I don't even know what company that was. Or occasionally it's just all about, maybe you know what the company is, but it's all about just getting their brand in your head.
It's about emotion, right? So there's two ways we can go on this. We can touch on in a couple minutes how I got introduced to sales and the types of things that they taught me and how they kind of enforced integrity and built that into the system so that you're doing the right thing all the time. But first, I want to cover what you were just observing, which is how they moved from advertising as it used to be letting you know that this problem exists and that these guys have put their inventive nature together for a solution. And then saying, here's the form and function of how that works. That used to be what it was. It was a type of passing along valid information, like in the 1800s. Right. And then once you get to the 20th century, post World War I, you've got the propagandists like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann, who are like, no, that's not the way to do it. What you want to do is emotionally manipulate people, and then tie their emotions to here's a pretty woman, show them the new car, and then if you drive this car, you get this type of woman. And cigarettes, like here's an authority figure, a doctor, he's smoking the cigarettes, and has nothing to do with the quality of the tobacco or that they're not using pesticides and fertilizer, all these other things. It's like it has to do with manipulating people psychologically. And so that's like the main difference. When you see an ad and you're like, I don't even know what this ad is for, that should be like a red flag right there. It's like this company's form and function they're not confident enough to be like, we make the best product. We have the product that won't break. We have the product that's not made by slaves. They're like, no, we're going to manipulate you with, here's a snappy song and here's some snappy images, and they're going to tie these together. All of a sudden buy this product that we didn't show the whole time during the ad. Right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I ever heard the Beatles song Revolution was during a Nike ad. And I don't think the Nike ad was like, hey, we make our products with slaves and we make it out of shoddy materials and they're going to fall apart after a couple months. We're going to charge you $100 for these shoes. They were like, hey, rock and roll music and, fast imagery and be cool, right? Yep. And so people have externalized their self-esteem because they don't have critical thinking. They don't have self-reliance. They don't have the inventive nature. And because of this absence, they try to fill it with conspicuous consumption. And the companies that are selling you all these products, they want those products to go obsolete prematurely. So they sell premature obsolescence. So you have to keep coming back and buying more and more of their products instead of making a product that lasts forever because it's really well made and it's made by hardworking people who are getting paid a fair wage. They're like, let's sell you something that's disposable so we can fill up all these landfills.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's really what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a really great point. You look at, especially going back to the example you gave of Nike, they're selling some of these shoes. They have these lines that are from like basketball players and other famous athletes. So you get like the Michael Jordans or the LeBron James shoes, and they'll be like $200. And there's no difference between those shoes and the other Nike products that they're putting out that are $50 or $100, because they have some of them are much cheaper from, they will also be labeled with some other basketball player, like, the Kyrie Irving shoes will be like half the price of the LeBron James or whatever. But I mean, there's really no difference between the shoes other than like the name being tied to it, but it's a status symbol for people to have these shoes that, like, hey, I got the latest Michael Jordans, and yeah, that people are getting their self-esteem from that rather than their own competence in life, really, and being able to be successful in different areas of their life that they don't even know how to go down that road. Instead, it's like, okay, I guess I have to have these various status symbols. And a lot of that is just been programming from, watching these ads on TV from a very young age and not being given the good role models and not being given discussions about the content we're consuming, that you're not getting in school, like you mentioned. So if your parents aren't sitting down and saying, hey, look, we need to talk about these advertisements and trying to introduce the child to critical thinking and the like, they're not really going to learn it through osmosis. It's not just going to, at least for most people, it's not just going to naturally happen. They're going to get programmed by what they're watching, the media they're consuming, which doesn't provide any of that if you're stuck in the mainstream.
Well, I know I didn't learn these things at home. I learned these things at school. And it's a so from a very young age, we're teaching kids, let me back up. From a very young age, kids are being conditioned and programmed to have this fashion signaling kind of effect going on, where you're not buying a pair of shoes because your other ones, you wore them out and they have holes in the bottom. You're doing it because the new style came out, and to keep up with being cool at school and being accepted in these artificial peer groups made by these like mandatory slave camps that you have to go to for 15,000 hours of your life when you're young. There's this whole layering effect. And I remember my dad trying to logically and reasonably say, look, when I was in 8th and 9th grade, you don't need to spend $100 and get these Air Jordans. I had one pair of Air Jordans. I remember wanting them for a couple years, several years before that. Finally saved some money up from mowing grass and stuff. I'm like, I'm going to spend $100 and get some of these. The new Air Jordans just came out. My dad, he's like seeing it as, how long it takes me to earn $100 and trying to talk me down from that. And I'm like, you don't understand the amount of cool I can buy by just having these shoes, Dad.
Right.
And I did learn to outgrow that status quo, but it wasn't until like maybe, 15 years ago when I was like, wait a minute, Nike uses slaves to make products, then they artificially inflate all their prices. And it's a whole dynamic that I wished to free myself from that. And I could do it so easily just by saying, oh, I'm not going to buy anything with a swoosh on it ever again. Now, I might someday do that in some situation, but I haven't done it yet. I've found very good alternatives, products that have lifetime guarantees, and that if they get holes or wear out or the stitching comes apart, they'll give me new ones. There are some legitimate companies out there that do use, at the minimum, they use labor that's at least voluntary, even if they're not getting paid as well as they maybe should. But, this whole, the Apple thing, to buy Apple products that are brand new and enforce that is something that people almost don't have a choice to do. So we live in a culture where, first off, they don't really tell you the truth about how things are made. And then when they do tell you, you don't really have an option. It's like, oh, you can buy Samsung, you can buy Apple. Either way, they're made under similar working conditions and they're artificially made cheaper. And we're invading countries around the world just to get these elements. I mean, I think I saw a study, now don't quote me on these numbers, but the numbers were like, you have 48 different elements that make up the human body, and the iPhone has 98 different elements used to make it, right? So talking about the periodic chart, it's much more complex to make these devices that are becoming ubiquitous and everywhere than it is to actually, compose a human body. And you have to just sit back and say, whoa, what is that all about? How many different places have we had to rob people of their rights to clean water and to live free and these sort of things? Because, it's a trend that's gone on for hundreds of years. This is what the British East India Company did for years around the world so that the British Empire could expand. They would take over a place because these islands have saltpeter, and they need saltpeter to make gunpowder for their cannons so they can go over here to Hong Kong Bay and suppress the people of China. So there was this whole intricate web of trade that was involuntary. And ironically enough, this is where the term free trade, was coined. It was from the opposite of free trade, pushing opium into China. So like when you get into what is the nature of this phrase free trade, you go back to the opium wars and you learn about how these advanced militarized corporations were using products that addict people artificially in order to control that population and to meet their needs as far as warmongering. So I'm not saying all of this is good or bad. I'm just saying you can't make a decision for yourself about any of this until you start to learn about it for yourself.
Right.
I know that was kind of a tangent, but it does come back to why I avoid buying Nike.
Right, sure. No, so, I've known you for a while now, and Choice Conversations has changed through the years where now I'm really taking it in a direction of personal development and real, like, finding actionable items that you can implement in your life to improve your life, right? So I guess with that in mind, and, you're talking about all these really interesting topics of, where where companies are being deceitful and having some underhanded tactics, and where people are perhaps not learning good values, I guess would be a way to put it. They're getting their self-esteem from status, which was, it's almost like a false self-esteem. It's not really, you don't really think highly of yourself. If you think, for me to look good, I need to have a pair of shoes, that's, there's definitely a contradiction there in the mind, if not at the conscious level, at least at the subconscious level. So I guess with all of these things in mind, as you've learned these things, what are the actionable things that you've learned to do, the actionable items that you can take and change your life for the better now that you've learned these things?
Well, I guess it was reprioritizing my time and my energy and my attention such that I could have, instead of my self-esteem being based on things I wear or things I own, having it based on having thoughts of substance and knowing that I don't have to have an answer for everything, but that the real value is knowing when to turn your learning process on, when to sit back and observe and ask questions and actually begin to explore and discover this entire amazing place that we're born into. And you can't do that unless you are able to manage yourself as an individual, to manage your time, to manage your own income and marketing and these sorts of things. If you want to be independent and not working in a cubicle for some multinational corporation that's doing all the things that I just mentioned, that takes a lot of self-responsibility that we really weren't prepared for in public schooling. It really doesn't get enforced in university unless you're finding it through how to pay for that university and you're out there trying to make money. And in my job in college, I was a cook mostly until I learned how to run my own business. Then I said, oh, this is much more rewarding, lucrative, fun. And on a long term, it helped shape my entire career as I left the corporate world, because it gave me the confidence to say, look, it's not something beyond me to learn how to do things for myself, to learn to do things I don't know how to do yet. In fact, it becomes an invitation. It's like, what are the things that you actually need to learn to do for yourself that can eliminate giving away your time, attention, and energy to things that aren't fulfilling in your life? So really, it's all one big experience, and you can categorize it down into, well, you put some time into learning the history. You put some time into producing art and artifacts that help other people get in touch, likewise with their own history and their own surroundings. You put some time into learning what are the processes that you actually use to get things done, to manage your time. I mean, I'm just as excited to listen to your David Allen interview as I was to interview David Allen many years ago, because I learned so much from reading his book, listening to his lectures, interviewing him. And then his GTD company called and said, we watched your interview. We want to use that to train some of our people. I was like, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So while I was, really excited back then to learn all that and to, put it into process and got my inbox and I'm using all these processes that he's teaching me, I know today I could gain just as much value or more just from re-listening to what you just had a conversation with them last week, because these things, they have entropy. And so by refreshing them, it's like, that's a battery that I could recharge, and all of a sudden I can get much more value out of my life just from hearing the conversation you just had with them as I did from implementing the process years ago. So that's the whole thing. It's like, just because you've done these things or gone through these processes once in your life doesn't mean that that's all you ever need to do. And so it's refreshing to be able to have colleagues that do things where it's like, we actually empower each other. It's like a convection current of empowering ourselves to be individuals and to be free. And so I just wanted to say kudos on getting that interview.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, it was very enjoyable to interview him, and it's very satisfying as well, just because he has had such a big influence on my life. I was thinking about it. I'm like, what are the big books that had the biggest impact on me? Like, what are my top 5 most impactful books, or top 10? And when I think about that, I feel like I shouldn't be putting Getting Things Done in there, because it doesn't necessarily have any big eye-popping, like, philosophical breakthroughs in it. Like, I read it and the scales fell from my eyes, and I saw the world now for what it was, rather than, it's kind of like, what was it? Plato in the cave,
Sure.
He realized that, oh my God, these are just shadows. There was nothing like that. Where there was other books that I read that were that way, that I'm like, oh my God, I had not been thinking about this correctly at all. But when I really think about what is having this huge impact on my life, I pretty much, I have to put it in my top 5, because I'm living it every day. I'm using it to keep track of the work I'm doing for my day job, as well as, work I'm doing at home, getting things done around the house, the honey-do list, that sort of thing.
Right.
For my hobbies, including choice conversations and, various other hobbies. And it also, it changes the way you think. You start thinking inside of the Getting Things Done system, right? Where, it's a way to help you organize your thoughts as well. So when I think about it like that it's, it's in my head, I'm living and breathing, getting things done. It's a way of life for me. I was like, wow, I would have never guessed this before I did the mental exercise, but Getting Things Done, it's in my top 5 as far as most impactful books on my life, easily. So it was really rewarding to then get the chance to sit and talk with David and thank him personally for creating that system.
Well, that's the other cool part about it, is you're drawing serious amounts of value, and he finds that as fuel and inspiration to keep doing what he does. Because from one side, I could see where what he does is a little bit monotonous. He kind of has to tell and convey the same bit of useful information to everywhere he goes, right? But at the same time, you're meeting all these people who are using it and getting all these varied effects that are all successful. And while, if I was thinking about it last week, I might not have put that book in my top 10. I totally, in context, would put it in my top 10, because it's allowed me to read so many other books and to actually have meaningful memories of these books, because I have a process I go through now when I read a book. And the same way that, like, when you interviewed Michael Labossiere or Gino Denning, and you're seeing, like, oh, there's only so many ways that people can deceive themselves or others through thoughts, like the fallacies that Labossiere talked about. Or for O'Denning, he's like, when you go to learn something, you're pretty much using the same process and method all the time if you actually are conscious of the process of learning. That's the same thing with David Allen. So if there's a scale, you're removing the scales from your eyes moment, it's when you realize that, wait a minute, all these different things that I have to do all depend on the same process. It's an input, processing, and output type of mode that actually kind of matches up with what O'Denning was pointing out. And I don't take any of these things as gospel. I just take them as, here are guys trying to figure out how their lives work and trying to convey useful information, and you take it and you apply what works and you drop what doesn't work and you try to make it your own. And everyone's going to apply things differently. But on a general scale, it's like anytime people can take part of what you're doing every day, whether it's thinking or doing, and say, look, here's the general model, here's the general method. You would observe your surroundings. Is this where it goes? Is this the permanent place where this thing goes on my desk? No. Where should it go? Oh, over there. Or I need to create a place for it to go because it doesn't have a place. And then all of a sudden, it's like you realize that, like you said, whether it's the honey-do list around the house, or it's something you have to get done in the office, or it's something you want to learn about a new hobby, you're applying these same rules and methods to get that done. And I think that's really, what the magic of what David Allen brings, because it opens up all these other avenues. Like, for most of the stuff that I need to teach people, I feel that I need to give them a resource to manage their time and productivity first. Otherwise, they're already so overwhelmed with everything they have to do in their lives that they're never going to have time to get to it. Right.
Yep.
And so I think there's a synergy, between all these different things that we need to take upon ourselves to input and practice through exercise and experience in order to become free and independent, because the society very much wants us to be helpless and dependent on the welfare state, pretty much. That's their goal. Their goal is to control human beings, and they can't control individual human beings as well as they can control everybody after they've been schooled, which is the reason they have this big 15,000 hour public schooling thing going on. I dropped this joke out there. I first heard it from Brett Veinotte when I was interviewing him for the first time, and he said, "What's the difference between the government and the mafia?" And I said, "I don't know, Brett. What is it?" And he said, "The mafia doesn't have a 15,000 hour indoctrination program to convince you that it's not the mafia."
Right.
Right.
Nice. Yeah.
And so that really, it's it seems trivial, that the little phrasing of the situation, but when you think about it, it's like, wait a minute. We have been through an indoctrination system, and this is kind of what John Taylor Gatto helps to remove those scales from your eyes about what was that schooling system and why is it antithetical to self-education, and how you don't learn through hearing declarative sentences. You learn through using the question mark and actually learning how to find your answers, right? And so that can tie back into getting things done, as well as it can tie back into a method for how to learn anything for yourself. And all these things become synergistic and kind of take on their own momentum. And I think that's what allows people to more easily and breezily make progress in their lives. And I think it's something that's missing from almost everything you would see in mainstream media or mainstream advertising or any of these traditional models, which I think are so broken. I'm pretty sure you think a lot of them are broken as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't do what we do every day. And we're always seeking to try to learn more about that system, learn more about ourselves, see how to improve this and reduce the drag and the entropy and the friction, and replace that with productivity and efficiency and the ability to do things easily.
Right. Now, you had said whenever you're working with people, one of the first things you find yourself needing to do is give them like a time management system or a productivity system, like getting things done, because they're already overwhelmed and don't have time to do things right. And this allows people, it enables them to set priorities and work on the things that they need to do, right? Because all of us have more things to do than we have time for. It doesn't matter whether you're using getting things done or not. It doesn't magically create more time. It just enables you to put things in their proper place.
Well, David Allen's altitudes of thought. So there's the runway, there's the 10,000 feet, the 20,000 feet, the 30,000 feet. I think that is actually a very useful aspect of what he does, and I probably don't apply it enough in my own work because, just even keeping up with the news, if I don't ask, hey, what is the long-term relevance to my audience, to my own legacy, you could find yourself doing things that you think are meaningful, like, responding to a bunch of tweets. Right. They really are trivial in the big picture. Right. And I think that type of time suckage, even if you know about these things, it can happen to the best of us. But the important thing is to every now and then maybe do a weekly review and say, oh, how did I use my time in the past week? Like I've kept track of what I do every day for the past, let me see down here. I got these big 3-ring binders, like 6 of them. So for like the past 7 years, I've been pretty good about writing down what I'm doing every day, what I'm researching, what I'm working on as far as a project. And even though I don't really review those, I've kept track of them. And that was that was way before I even picked up David Allen's book and talked to him. I'd been vaguely familiar with his system since early in the 21st century, but didn't really take it seriously or apply it because I had been exposed to many time management systems. I just didn't recognize like the simplicity and the veracity of what he was pointing out as juxtaposed to some of these other more convoluted systems, right? So even if you know about something, it takes a while to to kind of deduce the value from it. The same thing with Gatto. I had his book, The Underground History of American Education, since, I don't know, when he published it, into like 2004 or something. And it took me, because everyone was saying, you've got to read this book. You got to read this book. I got the book. I tried to read it, and I was like, I'm not really getting what he says. I went off and did a whole bunch of other research, came back around to, now I have this contextual understanding of the Prussian education system and all these other things. And then I read his book. I was like, this guy has it all. Like, he's figured it out. And so, you know, that's the whole thing. You can't think just because on your first glance that's not valuable or it's not useful to me or whatever. You have to be willing to keep your mind open and only close it when you have like verifiable, factual, actual, you know. And so it is a good exercise. Know when to keep your mind open, know when to have it closed, so you can go on and move on and use that new fact and make new progress. So, you know, it's an ongoing process, and none of us are done. And, you know I didn't know everything yesterday because I learned so much today.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. There's so much value to be had from the exercises David Allen has as far as looking at the different levels. You know, are you at the runway level, or are you at the like 30,000 feet or whatever, and determine, you know, are the actions I'm taking today leading me towards my goals? Right.
Right. Totally. You know, are your life goals or your higher altitudes, and then what you're working on down at ground level is what you're actually doing today. So this morning, you know, I was going through the Twitter newsfeed as an example. Instead of reading a paper in the morning, I look at my newsfeed because I only subscribe to 100 different people on there, and it's not really for my entertainment. It's these people are good at picking up and sorting through the news that's going on, and I saw these New York Times articles where they're like, oh, here's a graphic of all the people Trump's made fun of or whatever. Now, I didn't vote for Clinton. I didn't vote for Trump. And all I know is that the New York Times lost 95% of its profits and revenues last quarter. So they're not doing well. And when they're publishing like 4 tweets in a row, here's all these charts and graphs that we paid people to make that show Donald Trump making fun of people. And so I just had to troll them back a couple minutes. Now, if I compare that to David Allen's, methodology, is that really going to do something positive for me in the long term? Probably not. It's probably going to put me on a short list of people that they would like to have not on Twitter anymore. Because I said things like, you guys are talking about people who Donald Trump hurt their feelings. How about the 500 kids that Jimmy Savile abused, and current CEO of the New York Times, Mark Thompson, who used to be the Director General of BBC and concealed and lied about the Jimmy Savile case? Like, you guys are more concerned about the hurt feelings than you are the abused children. Right. Now, these are all facts. They're the guy who runs the New York Times companies. He was involved in concealing and lying about the Jimmy Savile scandal. He was there as a director general. He was informed on numerous occasions it was going on. And I'm talking about legal court documents where it says this. This isn't innuendo. This isn't internet rumor. You could search New York Times CEO Mark Thompson plus Jimmy Savile, and you'll come up with like 40 different articles from Forbes and Vanity Fair. This is known knowns out there.
Right.
So it's kind of inexcusable that they want to spend their time and resources at New York Times not investigating their own boss, but saying, here's a chart of people Donald Trump hurt their feelings. Like, I think that's all trivial. But if I'd step back and use David Allen's methodology, whether or not I should have spent my time like that this morning, probably shouldn't have. So lesson learned, move ahead.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be perfect, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. That if, there are times when, you're doing things just for fun or for leisure or whatever. Those are important goals that need to be met as well. That I include those whenever I'm doing my evaluation from the life goals level. I'm also looking at, okay, am I also getting the proper amount of leisure in my life and fun? For sure. I prioritize them as well.
That's a good point. Me trolling the New York Times, that is a form of leisure. I did have some fun, and I did move on to do things productive, and it did relieve the stress that I felt from seeing them spread fake news.
Right.
I'm like, this is literally fake news. It does not matter. It's not helping people. So
I heard a question that really ties in well with that view of the looking at things, the different levels from David Allen and the like, that kind of breaks it down into one simple question. And it was, what will my life look like 10 years from now if I spend every day like I did today? So, the common question that you hear is, if this was your last day, if you only had one day to live, how would you live it? And of course, that's, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, but in the end of the day, it's not really all that useful because, we're not in a, God forbid, unless you've been given a diagnosis that you're going to die tomorrow, right? Unless that's happening, you're not going to die tomorrow. So you have to think about today, and you have to think about the future. So what that question entails, it entails like both your life living, in the short term. How are you living today? Because you don't want to just be living life for the future. Like, okay, for every day I want to, bust my ass and work hard so that 10 years from now I have this goal met. Because then you're not enjoying the journey to get there, right? But at the same time, you don't want to enjoy every day without any regards for the future, so that you're not building up for these big goals at the end, right? So that's was the beauty of that question. I'm like, wow, that really takes in, okay, am I making sure that I'm having fun along the way while also meeting my goals, progressing towards these things that are really important to me? So that was another tool to kind of add into my tool belt.
I think it's a better tool than the other tools we had because, if I looked at today, it's the last day I'm going to live. Well, guess what? I'm not going to make any useful progress on these projects then because they're not going to be done today. Right. So I'm going to do something completely different. And as far as goals go, like there is a time and place for goals, but I kind of think of things as steps. And this might also mirror some David Allen influence because if I know I'm taking steps with integrity and paying attention and taking steps with empathy each step along the way, then no matter where I am at any given time, I'm in the right place. Whereas when people have goals, sometimes they compromise their values, they compromise their integrity in order to meet those goals because they put an amount of veracity or value on reaching those goals. When it's like, what good is reaching those goals if you lose your integrity or your values or your empathy along the way, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't. I think what it comes down to is that. Nothing that anyone does is the exact same thing for you, and it's not the right thing for you. This is where it gets back to people learning how to think for themselves, evaluate their situations for themselves. And it's an ongoing process and never happens in one day. But, coming across someone, again, like using David Allen as an example, he can really shape where you'll be over the next 10 years by using those thoughts and methods. Because, if I look at how I manage my time, it's like, well, if I keep doing what I did this morning for the next 10 years, I'd probably end up in Guantanamo for trolling the establishment. They don't want people like that around anymore. On the other hand, if I do something like that for a very short period of time, and then I have a whole day of being productive and editing my footage and editing my audio and producing useful tools that help people become autonomous thinkers and live a life that's full of freedom that they can, liberty is this one thing that in order to have it, you have to give it away to other people. So if these are things that we want in our lives, we can't have it if it's at a artificial scarcity in everybody around us. And you can't gain liberty and freedom by taking away everyone else's liberty and freedom. So there's these interesting dynamics that, again, these could have so easily been taught to us in like kindergarten or first grade or second grade, but that's not what those schools and those grades are all about. Those grades are gradations. They're striations that are artificially created so that by the time you graduate through that process, you're ready to contribute to this bigger dream that is to take away individual sovereignty around the planet at this point. That's their agenda. Their agenda is non-local accountability. That's the opposite of freedom. So I think, again, these aren't things that we can all learn in one day, but you might be exposed to some of these ideas for the first time and then start to learn how to reprioritize some of your time to actually figure this stuff out for yourself. Me, personally, I've spent the last couple months trying to figure out how to take what I do, which is produce things of value, give them away for free to people, and depend on their generosity to keep doing that. I've been studying some of the ways that my colleagues are conducting their businesses, which is they're running them more like businesses. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Tom Woods. So sure. I had a buddy come over, and my buddy is a little bit more well-to-do, and he says, look, Tom Woods puts out quality content, and he has a business where he, can support his family and his kids, and he's thriving. And all I see is you struggling. He's like, and your work is exemplary, but you need to work in these other areas to better take advantage of what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just going to continue expending energy and not getting enough to replace it. And you're not going to be able to do it long term. So I didn't want to hear that. But I said, I respect you enough to take you seriously. So I subscribed to Tom Woods' newsletter and a couple other people who are kind of experts in internet marketing without ripping people off. Because there's plenty of people out there that can tell you, oh, here's how to become a millionaire through doing X, Y, Z. It's like, I'm not interested in that because that's antithetical to what I'm trying to do. What I am interested in is how can I continue producing in my format, which is my podcast, can be up to 20 hours. It takes a long time to review and edit and compose all that content together. So it's not something I can produce on a daily basis. And how can I continue doing forensic historian work, which involves reading a lot of books that aren't on the internet, and taking what I learn and finding media that reflects that so I can make electronic and digital media and put that out there and continue to maintain any type of being able to do it, because all this stuff costs money. I give stuff away for free. The world doesn't give me a whole bunch of stuff for free. So there is like this struggle. So how do I deal with that struggle? I could complain about it and be like, oh, woe is me. Or I could say, what are the tools that are available that I could easily use that I'm not using? And so just engaging in the knowledge that, oh, something needs to be done. How do I do that? I need to learn something I haven't learned before. Great. I have a method. Oh, I need to reallocate some time to be able to work that into my schedule. Great. I have a method. So to have these tools and to know when to apply these tools and these methods for your own good, I think is something that is lacking in most people's lives. It takes away from their time to have any sort of appreciation or happiness. And I think it's those frustrations that build up that cause so much divorce in this country and all these other things that I see. The feeling that both parents have to be out there working and away from their kids in order to have the things they need. Well, most of that's driven by conspicuous consumption, keeping up with the Joneses, dependence on public school as we don't have any other option. So there's all these different layers. You look at it like strings holding down Gulliver. It's like Gulliver can't get up, and yet the strings of the Lilliputians are so, minuscule and tiny. But if you put thousands of them across you, these little misunderstandings are not clearly seeing the world. That's really going to hinder your ability to do what you want to do, and that's your freedom. So to understand a metaphor, from over 100 years ago, and to see how that can be applicable to you today. It only takes like a minuscule amount of energy to cut each one of these misunderstandings and to fill it in with a little bit of learning. But I feel like, again, that's a process I'm whittling away at every day because it doesn't all happen at once.
Right.
Maybe that's the theme today, is that it all doesn't happen at once. That's the purpose of time. Purposes of time.
Right. So I guess how would you recommend to others how they should go about learning to think for themselves? Because you certainly don't learn that in school. In fact, it's kind of the exact opposite. They're training you to not think for yourself. So what would be some tools, some strategies that the listeners could use to start thinking for themselves? Because basically, if I really thought about what's the theme for today, it really is how do you learn to think for yourself? But I don't know that we've really given the listeners like some real actionable steps that they can take going out of this interview. Would you have any that you could share?
Well, I'll start with the ending first. Listen to everybody, believe no one, and think for yourself. And now the question is, how did we learn to think for ourselves? Let's observe. Let's use our five senses and observe what's going on for the most part. This is a general, observation. People are running on stimulus reaction. That means something happens, and before you even have time to ask questions or learn anything new about it, you are reacting to it. And this is a lot of the way that social media works out there. And, caveat or warning, even once you know this, it'll still happen to you. But the goal is that once you know it, you can start to make it happen less and less and put more time in between those stimulus and reaction. And as you put more time in between the stimulus and reaction, you can learn to fill that with a question mark. And it's asking those questions in between stimulus and reaction and using your five senses to avail yourself of the information that's available through the internet, through your colleagues, through your mentors, through your parents, through your siblings, through your friends, getting their opinions. Take in some information before you take action or have a response. That is the solution. There's a famous quote, and I'm not even going to attempt to quote it because I'll massacre it. But the general notion is, so you can understand, between stimulus and reaction lies our freedom. That's where freedom is. It's in between stimulus and reaction that you have the opportunity to ask questions, to learn for yourself, to formulate your own understanding. And that's what keeps us from being automatons. And that is the exact process that keeps us separate from the rest of the animal world here on this planet. Because when the psychologists and psychiatrists were doing all this experimentation, let's say in the early 20th century, they were experimenting on mice, on pigeons, on all sorts of different animals, and they learned how to control. They have a pigeon that very much appears to be able to read and follow directions, but it's all run on stimulus response. They have mice that can find their way, through these different experiments. It's based on stimulus response. And they said, we can control these animals like this. How can we apply this to people? Well, if we take people and we take the thinking out between their stimulus and response, then we're all at this lowest common denominator where we can be very easily manipulated. And so this is very much the thing that allows us to become free of tyranny, of control, of all these mechanisms set up to zap or to extract or to suck our energy, time, and attention. And that's what makes people very easily malleable to authority and thus under control. So the same way that these animals can be stimulated and into having these reactions, they can do that with people. And this is exactly what the schooling system does. It takes away and kind of like if each individual is an amorphous shape, the schooling system makes a cookie cutter shape out of them, throws away that extra dough on the outside, and now everybody reacts the same when presented with the same stimulus. And that's what schooling is. If a school of fish are swimming through water and you throw a rock into the pond, they're all going to swim in the same direction away from it. They don't just scatter. They react as an individual unit made up of a bunch of different individuals. And that's how they want the people to react. When they tell you XYZ in the New York Times, they want everybody to have the same reaction. Oh, well, if it was Russian hackers, then we must, have to do this, right? So it's being able to observe that stimulus reaction is a form of control, and then pose the question: how do we avoid that? We put the question mark in between stimulus and reaction. Nice. And that is that's what makes us human. Our ability to use reason, because unlike the other life forms on this planet that are mobile, separating us from plants and minerals. The other life forms that are mobile, they've got fur and fangs and teeth and these other ways that they can just live stimulus reaction their whole lives. A squirrel that freezes to death in my front yard when it gets too cold and there's no shelter, it doesn't have self-pity. It doesn't have these other mechanisms. It just dies of cold, right? And it's not able to plan for its future effectively like human beings have to. Like we don't have fur. We have to actually cut some firewood, have the tools to make fire, and these sorts of planning for the future. And if we don't do that accurately, if we don't have enough food for the winter, I'm talking, extract yourself from the everyday terrarium that is the 21st century and go back to the 1800s for a minute. If you don't do these things and there's nobody around to help you, guess what? Nature takes over and makes you part of nature again, and you become food for the worms. So the self-reliant nature that had to be reinforced when the settlers came to America, this wasn't a problem really in Europe because there's so many people, the cultures are so old, the territories are all owned by royalty, there was no chance for freedom, you're either born into royalty or you're born a serf. This is what made the American experiment so unique, is that people came over here, you could have been young or poor, young or old, rich or poor, you were subject to all these same circumstances. If you didn't know how to grow food or hunt food or trap food, guess what? Not going to have any food. Same thing with water or shelter and these other things. And if you can't accurately predict the future or prepare for it, like any of these other animals that don't have this ability, they're just out there living. It doesn't affect them, right? But as human beings, we have to be able to use our cognitive aspects in order to survive. I mean, that's why you've never seen any other animal make fire on this planet, right? I mean, fire is a natural phenomenon from lightning, but we need it to keep warm. Otherwise, we cease to exist. And in order to do that, like I said, we have to have the tools to do it. We have to have the fuel to do it. We have to have the place to do it where it doesn't burn our shelter down. These are all things we've had to learn over thousands and thousands of years. And what they're trying to do is reverse those thousands of years of knowledge and make us all under control where we're like, okay, well, we can't exist without the state. We can't exist without welfare, right? We need the state to take care of us. Well, this is no different than feudalism back in the pre-American period. This is, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to take us backwards instead of forwards. That's, who's the they? They are the ones that own all the resources. They are the 1% that makes more than the rest of us ever will over hundreds of years, right? There are some people who have aggregated and accumulated unfair amount of resources, but is it unfair, or did we let them do that? While we're all, not we all, but while people are off, playing fantasy football and playing their video games and Xbox and stuff, there's other people out there taking over large resource centers and mineral centers of the world. So it's all about how you use your time. And I guarantee they didn't get to that point where they can take over all these resources running on stimulus reaction. They've put questions in there, only their questions have not been limited by morals or ethics. There's a quote by George Soros, and they're like, hey, do you consider the social consequence of the things you do or the things you invest in? And he's like, never. That's how I have billions of dollars. Right?
Wow.
And the quote that I didn't want to massacre, I actually looked up while I was talking. So it's from Viktor Frankl. It's from World War II. And it says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Right.
So the observation you take from that is stimulus response. And that's how some of the most evil and horrific things have been done in human history.
Right.
What is the answer to that? Putting space in between that stimulus and response, giving yourself a chance to learn. And that learning, that process of using your observation, learning, and communication skills allows freedom to exist. Because if you're out in the wilderness by yourself and there's a bear or there's a pack of wolves or there's any other type of predator, go ahead and try to talk to them about Thomas Paine's Rights of Man or any type of form of freedom. It doesn't exist. Freedom exists when there's more than one person around, when you have a social contract that we're not going to prey on each other and that we're going to collaborate. And that's where civilization at one point began. And I think that it's gotten to a point where human beings are groomed and conditioned by a schooling system and a media system to believe that we have no natural predators. And some of our natural predators actually are of our own species. Well, that's kind of tricky. Shouldn't we all be learning about that? How to recognize the psychopaths or sociopaths among us and to not do anything so rash as to say, let's exterminate them. Let's just figure out how to withdraw our energy and keep ourselves safe from them, right? I'm not saying that they shouldn't exist. They're a part of nature too. I'm just saying that given our observation skills and the deleterious effects it has on our survival, maybe we'd want to, learn some methods how to recognize them and keep our distance and not let them run everything. How about that? That'd be a good one.
Right.
And so, these are all just kind of things I wasn't taught in school, but in order to survive and thrive in this world in any capacity where you have integrity, these are things you kind of have to learn at some point or another.
Right. Yeah, I love that quote from Viktor Frankl, and I've made it many times in the show. It's actually part of the driving force behind the name of Choice Conversations. It has a double meaning. It's, on one hand, I'm hoping that the conversation is of high quality, but on the other hand, it's about giving you choices. You listen to Choice Conversation, you gain skills and tools that'll give you choices, which then lead to freedom, right? I mean, what is another synonym for freedom other than choice? I mean, I think it's a good one because it's, if you think about somebody who doesn't have freedom, someone in a prison cell, they don't have very many choices available to them. The more choices you give a person, the more freedom they have. And the more you can put that space between stimulus and response, the better you're going to be able to choose how you want to respond, right? So, yeah, I mean, an example of like a tool that helps to widen that space between stimulus response would be something like meditation, right? And there are, many different skills that teach you emotional equilibrium, self-mastery that fall under what would be considered spiritual disciplines, spiritual practices. I don't necessarily like those words for it, but when I say it, at least people know what I'm talking about. So, but yeah, things that help to improve your self-mastery, to give you that equilibrium, to make it so that when you're stimulated, you're still going to have that emotional response, but you're going to allow that emotional response to then bleed into your words and actions and your thought train going forward from there. Or you're going to say, okay, I realize I'm having an emotional response to this, and that's valuable information. Thank you. Subconscious mind, for giving me that emotion and letting me know that you have certain feelings about this. But now I'm going to sit back in this space that I've created and choose what is the best response for me to have going forward in order to get, more favorable outcomes.
And that's consciousness.
Yep.
So what you're talking about, the third meaning for choice that I'd throw down there, if you want to add it to your repertoire, it's completely up to you. It will be voluntary. Is that choice is a function not only of freedom but of voluntarism, of not forcing our will on other people. And so when you're talking about emotions, that just made me think about, like, what are emotions? Emotions are how we feel about what we think. So again, it comes back to thinking. So this thinking thing, this conscience and conscientious and consciousness thing that's in between this stimulus reaction, this seems to be really important. Maybe we should dig into it. You could also say that, you have the choice to think or not to think. So you can think and ask questions, or you could not think. That will be meditation. It doesn't have to have a negative connotation. The act of meditation is to try to clear your mind of all these thoughts and questions that are going on and just experience the peace of the moment. And then you're like, okay, I'm refreshed from that. Now let's get back into, how do I keep applying the question mark in between stimulus reaction so I can avoid being controlled and having my choices taken away? Because that is the essence of freedom. If they want to punish people, people say, oh, freedom doesn't matter. All these things doesn't. I'll tell you what, when they want to punish you, they being the state, when they want to punish you, guess what they do? They take away your freedom. It's either done through taking away your freedom of economics or your freedom of moving your person around anywhere you want on the planet and putting you in a cage, right? And limiting your access to information, limiting your access to other people, limiting your access to other communication. These are all artificial scarcities that are imposed, what? Not for freedom, but for control. And so, you want to control people, you do it by limiting their options, taking away their choice.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing you propose, where you also giving other people choices as well, and how liberating that can be. I personally love being able to remove myself from being responsible for other people's actions, since my enlightenment and learning about these things, right? So a common example of where this comes up regularly is with parenting and your children. Parents often, they want to solve all the problems for their children and not give their children the choices to learn on their own and to live their own lives, right? And when I learned this technique from, it was actually from Thomas Gordon, who wrote Parent Effectiveness Training. It's still to this day my favorite parenting book. He said in there, he's like, it's really important when your child does something to ask yourself the question before you respond. You're going to be, that's going to be a stimulus. The child is doing something, or the child is experiencing some kind of struggle or something. Maybe the child is exhibiting strong emotion. That's going to be a stimulus for you before you just automatically respond with your programming, as I like to call it, which is probably responding the same way that you were parented. If you don't become enlightened and start asking, these questions, putting the space in there, right? One question he says to ask yourself, is this right now my problem? Whatever they're experiencing, is it my problem or is it the child's problem? And often it's the child's problem. And if it's the child's problem, you're off the hook. You don't have to do anything. You can be like, oh, yeah, you're right. You are really struggling there with that. And you don't even have to step in and provide the solution. And it's so great in many ways. One, it liberates you from having to choose how other people are going to have to act, and you don't have to feel like, you're inferior because you're not able to think of all the solutions. A lot of parents feel like they have to come up with all the solutions for their children. And if they don't have one, okay, that's not good because I need to look perfect for my kids. So I better just invent something and hope that it works out all right. But the other thing it does is it sends a much better message to your child. If every time the child is having a struggle or is frustrated about something or whatever, and you step in and are providing solutions for them, the message you're sending is that child is not capable of solving their own problems. And that message, they hear that loud and clear. Maybe they're not necessarily thinking about it consciously, but subconsciously that message is coming through loud and clear that, you're not a capable person. You're not competent. You can't figure this out on your own. So, since I learned that, I'm like, wow, it made parenting so much easier. It made my relationship with my daughter so much easier. We don't fight about things, like we used to. And it was really just a beautiful question to ask. So that's like one of those, okay, when you have that space between stimulus and response, what are questions you can ask, before you make your choice, how you're going to respond. And that's a great one. Is this my problem or is it the other person's problem? And it actually, it's parent effectiveness training is, of course, talking about the relationship between parent and child, but it actually, that works really well with your relationship with anyone. Be it, your partner, be it a client or coworker. A lot of times people are like venting about a problem they're having and they don't want you to provide a solution. They just want to vent. They just want you to give them their ear and be
And you have to learn to recognize that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but a lot of times, people just, they get a stimulus and the response is, oh, okay, I have to solve this problem for this person. And then they get upset with you because that's not what they wanted.
A lot of times that's male-female communications right there too.
Sure. Yeah. So,
men don't like drama, so if a woman has a problem, it's like, let's get a solution, and the woman's like, no, I just want you to relate to it and like hear me out, and that's all. That was the problem. She just needs to be heard and listened to, and given some attention.
Right.
But I don't want to be stereotypical.
Right.
That's my intention. All right, so part of the cool part of being interviewed is I get my job, my responsibility is to try to drop nuggets for your audience that'll be useful and valuable and in a long term. But I also get to listen to you and pick up the nuggets you're dropping. So I wanted to verify, it was Thomas Gordon's Parent Effectiveness Training, that book you read?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I want to make sure I add that to my Amazon cart. And then you had talked about programming versus consciousness, or at least that's kind of how I was hearing it, because what strikes me is the difference between programming and consciousness is that consciousness is different from a computer program insofar as a computer program has to go step by step without any breaks in it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Consciousness is the opposite. We have this gap that's in our programming, if you will, that we have to fill in for ourselves. That's what makes us conscious. So we have this space, and it's that space that is our choice. But that choice also comes with responsibility. So we try to sometimes close up that gap in our programming, if you will, that makes us conscious and say, look, I don't want to be conscious. I just want to be stimulus reaction like a program. And that's what takes away our freedom. So there is this innate, kind of symbiotic connection between what makes us conscious human beings and that which is used to kind of take away that space to make us unfree and to have us say, we don't have self-responsibility. We must need government to be responsible for us. And it's kind of like there's a saying that to not know what happened before you were born is to forever be a child. So as long as we're always living in this stimulus reaction culture where the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, NBC is going to tell me everything I need to know, and that's it, we're going to continue to have this extended adolescence state of activity, and that's very much how we're controlled. And I think that part of the way that we get out of that is to learn how to use like the who, what, where, when, why, and how to our advantage. To learn that logic and reason are based on the law of identification. That each of those questions is, what is the identity of the person, place, thing, time, etc.? Learn how to use that for our advantage, and then learn how to integrate that choice into our work. So, for instance, when I produce a podcast and people look at it and they have this reaction, oh my goodness, 20-hour podcast, I can't listen to that. That you got to make it shorter for me. You got all the responsibility comes back to me to make something to cater to them. I say, no, I'm offering you choice. You can listen to the first hour if you have a short attention span and just get, the short of it, the summarization. And if you find that summary enticing, maybe you reprioritize some of your other time away from fantasy football or watching Dancing with the Stars, and you take in the larger body of information. But people mistake it and have this reaction that by me offering a long piece of media that they could listen to all month and study, or, you could study each of these episodes if you really wanted to get down to it for a year and answer your own questions about it. But if you're a spectator and you just want to listen to it in real time, yeah, it takes longer, but I'm offering you the choice. I'm putting the responsibility on the listener, hoping that the listeners will grow into that situation instead of shrinking back and saying, no, that's too big. I need to be maintained at this small conscious level. I'm used to a 30-minute podcast and that's it. Otherwise, I don't know what to do with myself. And so as an artist, I always find it kind of a struggle between I'm trying to fill a need. I see that things are the way they are because certain things have been taken away, and a lot has been taken away. And I only have so much time to give the things that I see back. And I'd rather give it back in a way that I know this works. It's comprehensive. I'm preserving a lot of data that otherwise would go missing, that otherwise is too disparate for people to take time and put together for themselves. And if a few people recoil in a reaction mode to that, I can't do much about that. But if I can deliver the content in such a way that eventually people get the drip, 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 oh, wait a minute, I can learn how to elongate my attention span because everyone's attention spans are being made shorter. I think the recent Time magazine article said, people have the attention span of a goldfish or less. That's like less than 8 seconds. Guess how easy it is to control people when their attention span is 8 seconds. I'm pretty sure it's the easiest it's ever been in history.
Sure.
And so if I can do anything in teaching people about the space between stimulus and response, it's not to tell you how to think, or what to think. It's just to let you know that there are tools out there that people have developed, useful tools that help you in these areas. And I think that's very much what you do on your podcast. If I look at the last 50 episodes you've done, each one of those is a different component and skill set, and not all of them are applicable to everybody. But every couple episodes, there's something strong that everybody should actually get in touch with. And then you just need to know. It's like, oh, if I need, this aspect of running an online business, that you've made a component, and here it is. Because it's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing where to find the information when you need to use it, right? That's kind of what you've encapsulated in your podcast.
Yep. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Well, speaking of short attention spans and long-running podcasts, this one has come to an end. We run out of time. But before I let you go, I did want to give you a chance to let my listeners know the best place to find out more from you.
Well, my website is tragedyandhope.com. It's named after a 1966 history book, which was censored. It was censored because it contains some views that help people overcome these irreconcilable or seemingly irreconcilable views of history and unite the audience in the frame set of freedom. So tragedyandhope.com is my website. My podcast is called The Peace Revolution. Also, seemingly irreconcilable coincidences, peace and revolution. How do you reconcile these? Well, you do it through learning, and it's more about taking these seemingly disparate angles and showing you how they actually fit together. So instead of dividing my audience all the time, I'm trying to unite people from different viewpoints by showing them if you look at things through this angle, everything kind of zips together and becomes a single coherent surface. My only social network, social media foray is Twitter, and my handle on there is @TragedyAndHope.
Great. All right, and I'll be sure to link all of that stuff in the show notes for my listeners. So, all right, Rich, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Chris, thank you for the invite. Thanks for everyone who listened, and thank you for doing what you do out there. It's a big help to humanity.
Oh, you're welcome. Same to you. All right, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Rich Grove. You definitely need to check out this guy's stuff. If you're not familiar, his work is really, really high quality. So tragedyandhope.com, the Peace Revolution podcast. I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes. Check it out. If you enjoy the content and you found value in it, then definitely contribute to Rich and his work. It's really important to support people like this that are really making a difference. If you haven't had a chance to go over to the Facebook group and sign up and join there and join in on the discussion, that would be great as well. I'd love to see you. It's if you just go under Facebook groups and search for Choice Conversations, that should come right up. I always love to hear from my listeners, so it would be great to see you on Facebook. We could have a choice conversation together. All right, everyone. I hope you have really wonderful holiday. Take care of yourself. And remember,